Soldiers speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars. Soldiers speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their futures. Soldiers speak out.
Did any of you wonder how the title of this came about? Don't say thank you for your service, that continues my oppression. Any of you wonder how that title came about? Well, I'm going to refer it to my colleague, Mark Fleming, who is an infantry veteran, Vietnam, and will continue to share that. I'm also from the Vietnam era, but not infantry, 66 through 69, and then Zahid Chaudhry is also a veteran, and he'll share. But Mark most recently was at a vigil, FOR, and a person came up, actually it was a reporter if I remember, and said, thank you for your service. And Mark had a classic response. Mark?
Actually, what I said is that my military service didn't mean anything because it was pointless. My real service began after I came home and began speaking out against war. So when people say thank you for your service, I point out that's what I'll accept that. And thanking me, this is personal, thanking me for my service makes me uneasy simply because, well, what did I do? I was a foreign occupier in a war that had no purpose, had no meaning, and we just killed killed hundreds of thousands, displaced many more, trashed the environment, and you're thanking me for that service? Right. Or maybe you're thanking me for smoking all the pot so I wouldn't have to think about it. Did
that reporter, with a video or a writing,
She actually quoted that in the
She
paper.
quoted it and put it in the paper,
Yeah.
amazingly enough.
And that's really not uncommon among veterans. There's a famous essay, and if I get it correctly, Camilo Micah Baja, I think, a Vietnam veteran, professor of philosophy. He wrote one of the lead articles about this. Like, when you say thank you for the service, what are you thanking me for? I mean, what did I do?
Mark and I are independent VA claims agents, and often, veterans will come in or active duty seeking help, and occasionally we get people that are my age and older who probably don't know why that phrase bothers people. And we did have one of our friends who actually trained us and says, thank you for your service. And she was coming from the World War II days, and it really triggered one of the Iraq vets. And we had to clue her in why don't use that phrase around the veterans that we're working with. Matter of fact, I wrote a little paragraph to get us started, and then it's very interactive. Why do war veterans not talk about their experiences? Why do they carry vivid pictures in their minds of the innocent dead and maimed or destroyed families and communities? In addition to serious disabilities, why do they suffer high rates of lifelong problems like PTSD and depression and suicide, 22 a day, substance abuse, domestic violence, and homelessness? And we're saying this whole system that made us veterans in the first place continues to oppress us now that we're no longer in uniform. And so we'll discuss about some of the things that we know as veterans, but we'd be interested in hearing if any of you are veterans or know of veterans or are aware of some of the oppressive issues that our society has.
The first thing which comes to mind is moral injury. Mark will speak to moral injury.
Yeah, I mean, it's a new concept that I've seen it probably in the past year or so. The idea, because we always think about PTSD in terms of coming back from a war. And treating PTSD means creating a sense of safety. Well, a moral injury is it's somewhat related to that. I mean, the actions that cause the PTSD also can contribute to the moral injury. But the idea of moral injury is you did something that was wrong. In other words, you killed people. Your country says it was right, but you killed that person and you remember it.
And you were trained differently, you were brought up differently, and then you were programmed to do just the opposite of what your training was. And so that's a violation of your own morality system.
Our colleague Larry Kirshner, who's not here today, has a poem called The Man I Killed, where he killed a North Vietnamese soldier, and that soldier has stayed with him the rest of his life. So that simple action, I mean, did it out of duty. His country said do it and said it's okay, but that doesn't take away from the fact I did something wrong. So where PTSD says safety, a moral injury says you need forgiveness.
Matter of fact, when Mark and I were taping him sharing that poem, all of us who are veterans started triggering our own issues as he was reading the poem. And I had to stop the filming and reduce the trauma that we were all experiencing. Mark was back in the jungles of Vietnam type of thing, and others were being oppressed or hazed in the service or whatever the case might be. So I had to stop and reduce the stress right there, right while we were taping for a poem that Larry created.
And that's kind of the obvious oppression. In other words, the veterans themselves are bearing a lot of the brunt of this. But there's another level of it that really affects us all, which is you have this idea of thank you for your service. I call it like a cheap, easy sentiment in that you say that and somehow it's okay that they're over there doing all that stuff. And you don't think about, well, why am I asking them to do that? Why do I think it's important that they go over and kill those people, destroy that country? And I think that's something that you can take away, at least in terms of work you do with other groups, is how do you relate to people like that? The idea that if you just say thank you for your service, everything is okay. And to me, it's not okay, because I look at the nature of the war, where they came from, look at the nature of my own war, and say there's kind of a sense that, well, the only thing wrong with Vietnam was we didn't thank our troops. You hear that all the time. We didn't give them a homecoming. So if you just give them a homecoming, everything's fine. So that's what we're doing now. They're all heroes. And I have a kind of a problem with calling everyone a hero, because to me a hero is the guy that takes out the machine gun nest single-handedly, does something like that. Not that their service doesn't mean anything, but the hero is another level. But now they're all heroes, that elevates it to heroic act doing in our name. And you think about war, it's always done in the name of the country. When I look at my own service, I say, my country told me to pick up that gun, and that was wrong. I picked up the gun. That was also wrong. That's my responsibility. But they told me to. So there's really two sides of it. And by just saying thank you for your service, you're a hero, we don't have to think about any of that. So I'd be curious to hear, have you all had any experiences like that, or been in a situation where you've had to deal with that kind of thing? It creates a different meme. We talked about structural control, the structure that leads us to continue war and militarism. This is part of it. I'd be curious to hear whatever experience you all have had with some of that, or how you might use this kind of information.
John?
John?
Well, I've been thinking about this lately, so that's probably why it attracted me. And I'm also, it may not be as true in Vietnam, but when the volunteer army came along, there's a tendency amongst young people, young men, they want to be heroes. They want to be protectors of the group. They actually have altruistic impulses. Mm-hmm. They want to help. And that's taken advantage of in our system by the warmongers. Mm-hmm. That's horrible. That's a really good trait of human beings, and young men have that.
That's a very good point.
And it's just boomeranged. It comes back. Anyway, that's my.
Well, I think that's one of the problems you see with veterans who come back, because they look at what they've done. I mean, we haven't won these wars, and a lot of veterans come back and now they see the ISIS flag over the places where they and their buddies suffered and died. So what are they to think about? So they do one of two things. They either get totally depressed, go into substance abuse, and maybe even commit suicide, or they turn around and say, it was all right, it was all for the greater good, it was the right thing to do, and you can't take that, you're trying to take that away from it. And I think that's where you have this dichotomy between, the civilian population and the veteran population. The sense that, especially now, because so few people are really involved. I mean, do any of you know veterans? Or active duty members?
Yeah, yeah.
Or veterans that are not on the street or homeless?
But I mean, when you look at who actually serves, I mean, it wasn't all that many back in Vietnam days with the draft, but even now, it's even a far, far smaller population.
Yeah, less than what, 5% of the
Yeah.
whole total population?
So we don't really have a connection to these wars in our name. I mean, when you had a draft, you had somewhat of a connection, but if you weren't draft age, didn't have a child of that age, then that war was just away.
And it goes to the very question of who we are. Correct me. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Lynn, Rai, John, you, everyone. That to me, the basic human nature is love and understanding. And helping each other and being collaborative. But we are trained to kill. Totally opposite. Violence and oppression is what we are trained at. To carry out oppression of the elite in the name of a country. So we all pay taxes, vote, and give our collective energies into the war effort in the hands of the few to carry out whatever they want, whichever never-ending war, or creating enemies or fabricating enemies. Where does that end? There are few facts I would like to give you. So you would like to, the first thing is moral injury, and we know this moral injury because our nature, the nature of the humanity is different than we are trained at. I still remember what we were made to do day after day from before sunrise, all day long. Kill, kill, kill. What makes the green grass grow? Blood, blood, fresh, red blood. And while you're doing it, you're stabbing your bayonet into the tires and mannequins and bodies. And I had, after a while you think, this is not what I did all my life. I loved and helped. I joined, for disasters, for earthquakes, for floods, for fires and other things. And what am I doing? So that moral injury goes deep, and the guilt trip. My buddies died, my buddies got, male and female, go through substance abuse, have severe military sexual trauma, had this and that, and substance abuse to cope because they don't want to think. They really don't want to think about the past or those events. Why? Because that's opposite to human nature. Most people in the United States, do they know that we are at war today as we speak with 8 countries? Sovereign countries, even our friends. Drone bombing, grandmother 65-year-olds. Just imagine a day before Christmas when a grandmother goes with the 2 of the kids to pick okra. Just think of Christmas, because they call it Eid. So just think of it in our framework, Eid. A day before Christmas, a grandmother, 65-year-old, going out on the back of her home to pick okra, and she gets drone bombed.
Mark and I work with veterans at Coffee Strong, which is a GI-owned coffee house that works with veterans and active duty people. And I get veterans coming in, and I ask them about where they served, and they tell me about the countries that we never were, but were, and they got injured, and they can't even get the benefits because we weren't at war. I was never there. It's not in my records, and then I'll say, oh, we're in Mindanao on Holo Island, and the eyes will light up, I said, yeah, because in my day, it was Laos and Cambodia that we never were. But we had people there that were injured and killed, and then trying to help them get the benefits of that. Talk about structural oppression, is they don't even recognize the injury that they went through, in places that we never were.
So what Mark and Dennis were saying, please spread the word. You, every single person in this conversation here, spread the word. This is what soldiers are told to do. I remember when I was told to go to the military brig and get out, soldiers, Because they refuse to fight. The outside world doesn't know about it. So, and they say, oh, you are ordered to do that. So if they don't fight, this is what happened. They go to the military brigs, and the world does not know about it. Because they're on military installations. So, and if they do it, then they live with that moral injury. The first thing we mentioned. So look at the two choices the soldiers have. Live with the moral injury, do the dirty deeds of the elite of the planet, or go to jail or get hazing or get raped and get whatever happens in the barracks at night.
John and I grew up in an age where what was the enemy of the moment? You know, well, we grew up when the enemy was the Japanese, the Germans.
You're older than me. It was, by the time I became awake, it was the Soviets.
The
Yeah.
Soviets, okay, yeah, I forget that I am the youngster in the group, yeah, but, yeah.
Enemies of the
I grew
yesterday.
up and the enemies, that I was told was the Germans. So then, in '64, I went to Germany and studied. And my roommate's father was a Messerschmitt pilot, trained to kill my father, who built Navy warships, trying to kill his father. And I'm thinking, this is bloody nonsense. Blödsinn Unsinn, they say in German. And I'm thinking, oh, but then what happened? Well, it was the big communist scare, and it was the red Chinese. Well, now my daughter has lived in China for 13 years, and I'm thinking, what is it about history that when I talk about history, we talk about World War II, we talk about Korea, it's sort of our whole mindset is built on periods of time by
Wars.
war,
Right.
Imperialist,
and
colonialist.
who was the enemy at the time, and it's sort of every enemy at the time now owns a fast food place. So take a look. What is it? It's teriyaki stands, and I'm thinking, well, what's it going to be for Afghanistan?
Kebabs.
John?
Well, you're right. I don't know how old you are, but as soon as I went to visit and live in another country, it was Germany.
Yes.
And it was that was the reason I heard about that. I wanted to know what happened there that we had to fight this war, and I found Germany a wonderful place, and I enjoyed learning their language. From that experience, I would hope every high school or college, as soon as they're mature enough, would go live in another country. And they're going to see that we're all humans. And I noticed when I started working around the 6 months before the invasion of Iraq, we had a petition, and so I talked to everybody who signed. Two things. One, I can't explain. Half of them were left-handed, and the other thing was the activists had lived in another country.
Yes.
Their Peace Corps or just curiosity took them to somewhere. But yeah, I was drawn to Germany for the same reason you were, because that was the enemy. I mean, when I was actually born during the war,
Yes.
that's the enemy that we were fighting.
Well, now recently, Mark went back to Vietnam, where his first introduction to the country was as an infantryman.
And actually, it's one of the perverse results of my first tour in Vietnam was I got the perspective that you and Dennis got by going to Germany. Like I saw, actually, they didn't train me very well because I actually saw the Vietnamese as people, and I realized that there's really nothing that different between them and me. And my thought was that I'm fighting a war in somebody's backyard. I mean, thought about it. So I could have soldiers going through my backyard, and they could do whatever they want. And suddenly I realized this was their home, and that's why they were fighting. And you always say how we always say the enemy is innately evil. I came up with the idea is these people are resourceful and determined. And I mean, that was I went as a college graduate, so I had an advantage over people who got out of high school. So, but still, to me, that was my first awakening. And as Dennis mentioned, I went back 40 years later, to a country where we lost the war, and like I couldn't see any difference. I mean, I saw sickle and hammer and sickle and red flags, but as far as I could tell, I was in a capitalist country.
Which I find so ironic these days. I'm from the Vietnam generation, grew up, went to college in that era, and to me, I haven't wrapped my head around the idea that now Vietnam is a tourist destination for Americans. It's just so schizophrenic for my experience, you know. And I totally get the idea of travel as a way to open our minds. But many Americans are fearful of even going to another city in our own country,
Yes.
let alone another country. But I think that if we could somehow engage people in going to Bainbridge Island and seeing the wreck of the greenhouses that the Japanese were growing roses in, that would help people understand that right in our back door, that we had foreign peoples that were Americans at that time, and we ripped them out and take them to Native American reservations and show them, you know, these are Americans, and what have we done to the Native Americans of our country here? So if we could take it to the step of, for those of us for people who can't travel, that we could look in our own back doors and look in our own backyards and realize that we have some of this that we can learn from right here.
And when you say thank you for your service, you're saying thank you for interning those Japanese.
I don't say thank you for your service. I think that perpetuates the military system
Oh, it does.
in which we operate, because, I mean, I totally agree with what you were saying. I sorrow for the people who go and have to do duty in my name, because I think the whole thing should be dismantled. I don't want to thank them for service that maims and kills and destroys.
That's one I think one of the insidious parts of that whole idea is it puts a veil over anything of what
On
we're doing.
purpose, that's designed.
It just
that way.
drapes all this war under, you know, just wraps it in the flag and says we're not going to think about it. And that's what I want people to start thinking about.
And Mark and I see veterans who have been deployed multiple times, and I take a look at their service medical records, and I see the 17 meds that have been prescribed for them as a result of that. And maybe 8 of those are psychotropic meds, very dangerous ones. I look at the ones like Seroquel, I'm thinking, ooh, I hope someone's monitoring your use of this drug, because many people have committed suicide or have been homicidal as a result of this, or going off the drug because they didn't want to live with that anymore. But, you know, Mark and I come across these veterans all the time, and it's not just one time, and one time is enough. One time is too many. But some of them have had 2 and 3 or more deployments, and they go back damaged and even more damaged when they come back.
So when you think about that aspect, it's impressive that we haven't had more people killing each other at Fort Lewis, or, you know, people that are completely drug addicted, intense moral injury, who don't turn on other soldiers and kill them. I mean, I don't know. We've been lucky in that regard, and we look at that as, oh, this guy is an aberrant because he just killed his fellow soldiers. Well, we've made him that person. Yeah, he chose and he went into the military, but
The
he
right
ended
question.
up in a situation that was totally beyond his or her control, and then we want to punish that person for what has been created by our militaristic view. I mean, we are completely a sick country when it comes to that. And Jeremy Scahill, I don't know how many, put it in the terms of, you know, we have lost our moral compass. We have lost our way. We are the ones who've gone to the dark side, you know.
Taxi to the dark side.
One of
Taxi to the dark side. Taxi to the dark side. Has everybody seen that documentary, a video?
No.
An ordinary taxi driver in Afghanistan, okay, saves money, borrows money from others, buy a little old used car, and he, you know, gives rides. And then the OGAs, you know, other governmental organizations, CIA and the cohorts, and then take him and they torture him and they kill him.
What's it called?
Taxi to the
Taxi.
taxi. He's a taxi driver.
And what country was that?
Afghanistan.
But you know, it's not just our veterans going to other countries and injuring them. We have veterans injuring our own veterans.
Right, yeah.
And, you know, that's tragic enough. We have male-on-male sexual trauma, 30% of the troops today.
In fact, aren't there more
This is reported.
male victims of sexual trauma
Then there is
women?
female.
Then there are female. Now, we hear
The
the
incidences-
female thing, and Mark and I have been dealing with those that have gone through military sexual trauma, and it's PTSD, secondary to the military sexual trauma, but we also have it male on male, and I've had 2 clients now within the last 3 weeks that we're working with, and it's very, very tragic. Zahid knows about, what do you want to call it nicely? Hazing? That's a nice name for it.
Teaching a lesson to the people, to the soldiers who were trying to go to the captain, the commander or the chaplain. So what was the military sexual trauma happening in the barracks at night or in the bathrooms? And then when you go raise the voice, and the person who, because if you don't raise the voice, again the same thing, moral injury or live with in the jail. So here, if you raise your voice, because it's the right thing to do, otherwise you're complicit in the crime which has happened. Okay, so either you raise your voice, then you have to pay the price for it.
Or you become the victim for raising your voice. John?
In the last, I guess, year, there was a scandal about the Veterans Administration not having, I don't even remember it, but the kind of stuff you're talking about was not talked about at all.
I've
Right?
seen it a lot in emails that I get. Been hearing about mostly women sexual assault, but, and then the problems they face when they try to do something about it. I've seen it a lot I don't know where the emails are coming from for sure, but.
Well, even trying to claim that you've been injured reopens the trauma. And I try to sensitively help them, and I'll use emotional freedom techniques, tapping on the meridian points to reduce the stress so that they can tell their story, because just telling what happens re-traumatizes them. Or if they're in therapy, the therapist says, tell me more about, they open it up and then say, oh, time's up, see you in 6 weeks. And what's happening? They're being molested right now for 6 weeks, and no skills left to change that.
So just look at it. It's the violence which we export, then it comes home to roost. It is the same concept. It's the addiction to violence and oppression, top-down approach. We think we can do it in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Yemen or Somalia. What about those drone pilots? Me and my wife, we met some soldiers and couldn't figure it out. They were very angry and upset, and they couldn't go to sleep at night. And their health is going crazy because they can't go to sleep. So I said, my wife asked me, said, what's the matter? And of course he didn't answer. And then me and him got together sometime later that day and said, so then he opened up and veteran to veteran, and then he told me, he says, I can't go to sleep at night because the faces of the innocent children playing in the, behind their home comes to my mind because I was told to blow them up, and I did. So I see the playing, vividly, very, very clearly, and then their body parts, their little hand is here, little leg is there, hundreds of feet away, and they're all scattered. And it says, I see before and after, and it says it comes to my mind day in, day out, and I can't even talk about it.
Matter of fact, Mark helped a veteran who was a drone pilot, never saw a step of combat. He was in a comfortable chair, air-conditioned room.
And he actually never even fired a missile. He was the one who collected the intelligence that went back. But even that created that.
How do you cure that? I mean, you said that by being an activist and doing what you're doing helps.
It helps. I mean, it doesn't ever go away.
Yeah.
I think you can come to terms with it. That's essentially what I've done is I can't change the fact that I accepted those orders, and I did that. And I even knew better. I mean, I knew that if I went over there and got killed, it was a total waste, but I did it anyway. And on one hand, I actually did that. That's an achievement, but it's an achievement in the wrong side. I mean, that's where I have my biggest, I guess, internal stack. I can't resolve those two things. I don't know that I ever will. They sort of live with each other.
Now, John, you asked what can they do, and we help people go to the benefit side to be compensated for their injuries, but there also is the treatment side. And the treatment side is a little more limited when it comes to some of the post-traumatic stress or the systematic oppression that they have. And all too often they're prescribed medicine, and lots of it. I've had a veteran that had 27 different meds. And it scared me because that person took it for breakfast and then he was full, because by the time you take it with water and you had 27 pills, you've already eaten. Your stomach's full. Or you go through talk therapy. Talk therapy can be quite good, but it sometimes takes 2 to 3 years and a great deal of trust in the therapist. But within the system, that therapist often changes. So then, where's Dr. Smith? Oh, he left. Dr. Jones is your new therapist.
So tell me about it.
So tell me about it. We're starting all over. So now you're back in the jungles of Vietnam with incoming, and your best friend just got killed. And the person, after a while is going to say, I'm out of this. And so they're not going to get that help, and then they land up self-medicating or, alcohol, or they're on the streets, they've lost their jobs, they have a hard time, basically with that, or they get other issues in mental health like panic disorder.
I'm going to say
That's
something.
one thing I've always thought about is about this moral injury, is that it's so opposite to how humans are supposed to be, but also the age at which it happens, I think, would cause it to be, for a lot. I mean, I think of them as being, a lot of the people are quite young.
Yes.
And so to have to endure that.
And they're still developing in their brains even.
And so many of them I met from the South when I was in Texas or Oklahoma, I found out that they were poverty. They were so poor, and their mother and father either were there or not there or whatever, so they lied about their age, the years. They changed that. And how old are you? Because you really get that feeling sometimes. You're asking them, and I said, well, I lied. I'm 17 or I'm 16. What?
They lied to escape.
To get in.
Yeah.
To get in,
To get off the
escape their
street.
Actually,
system.
Dwayne did that.
Yeah, our other veteran, Dwayne did that also.
He did that.
And
He was in Korea.
Yeah.
For that same reason, as a 17-year-old.
yes,
Yeah.
So all the other things, and then I thought we stopped doing that. I met this very young person, very angry, and really loses the touch and goes off in the training. And then he told me, well, the prosecutor gave me a choice: go to jail for life and more. I said, what? For life and more? He said, yeah, I kill people. I said, okay, or join the military. So I did. I said, but we don't do that now, officially, for decades. He said, no.
They're still doing it? Wow.
Where was this?
That was very common in
I
Down
was going to
south.
say it was common in Vietnam.
Yeah, so go to jail. So he says, I didn't want to go to jail for life, so
Where was that?
down south. So,
But the whole thing is economically driven. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
the profits off keeping war going and finding an enemy that justifies why we do this
At some
has
level.
been going on.
Creating enemies. We create.
I
We
know.
give them money and weapons, and we
I know.
tell them
I
what
know.
to say or do,
And you-
so that we have a never-ending supply of enemies, so that the military-industrial complex never stops.
And you might have seen this on the internet somewhere, line that America has been an independent country for 226 years. We've been at war for 220 of those years with someone.
Yeah.
So we have a perpetual war. It's always like, we need to be going out. And so that's just, that becomes the norm.
And we were a country that was established on othering. I mean, we created enemies out of the Native Americans. I mean, we came over here to escape our enemies. I mean, that is just so deeply, deeply, deeply ingrained in our psyche that we need an enemy. We create our enemies and we feed off our enemies and we keep ourselves going.
Do we ever ask the question, what kind of moral injury does it create on all of us collectively individually and on the veterans themselves. And what is the cost?
I think most Americans don't even think in those terms.
Why not?
Because.
Well, and many times.
They're
because
great
we
people.
Because they don't
They're
want us to
thinking
think
people.
that way.
That's why I used the term indifference today when I mentioned that.
Yeah.
Because either that or we suffer from compassion fatigue. We've heard it, we've heard it, we've heard it. Stick my ears, I can't hear it anymore.
I can't help but talk about this story. Last Sunday, people in West Seattle gathered at the California-Alaska Junction, and we marched down to Terminal 5, where Shell's gonna put their drilling rigs, because we didn't want Shell to drill in the Arctic. On the way down, we passed the VFW post. Now, for the last 10 years, they've had a sign out there. It's gone now, something like, "Thank the veterans for protecting the world." It's a very provocative sign, I thought. Something like that. But instead, when we were walking by, there was a table there with water, and 2 veterans were offering us water. They knew why we were out there. It wasn't about war and peace, but it was about this terminal. And one of the middle-aged veterans, a woman, said, I didn't hear this, she said it to somebody else, "I don't want to fight another war." I don't want to, and so that kind of thing had never happened that the VFW people were helping protesters.
Actually, in a book I'm reading now about Vietnam, they're talking about in the 50s, the veterans organizations were actually opposed to further intervention in Vietnam because they had just come through Korea, and it was a stalemate. But somehow within a space of 10 years, we completely turned that around. And there's that structural oppression.
Power of the structural.
Yeah. And I think that, when you say, they say, thank the veterans, thank all the heroes, that's wrapping it all in the flag and saying, don't question what we're telling them to do, just thank them. Go shop.
One of the things that Coffee Strong is doing is trying to organize to get back into the high schools, to raise awareness among the high school age about the whole area of militarism and the enlistment and other type of things. And one of the mantras I've said to them is quit making veterans. So we're not taking care of the ones that we have. Mark and I, in volunteering to be claims agents, find out that some people have gone through their evaluation through what used to be a group called QTC, which is an outsourced group for evaluation of injuries by the VA, who said they're overloaded, they can't do it. QTC is owned by
Lockheed Martin.
And the head of QTC became the assistant director for the
So
Veterans
Lockheed makes money
Administration.
on the war and then on the post-war.
So now if you
And the
were
revolving door.
a
Don't
weapons
forget the
industry, are you going to say the nature of your injury is 50%? You say 0. Why? Because you don't want the cost of war being, due to your own.
It cuts into the
thing.
defense contractor and bombs. The machines and things we put precious things and collective world resources we put into objects called bombs, missiles, destruction, death, violence.
So when
Instead of love.
they get a rating where it's very low or no, then Mark and I are saying no in our language means not yet, because we work very hard as claims agents to show the documentation that their structural oppression has led to the injuries that they're experiencing, and we will work for them to get their deserved compensation.
Some great.
Don't you remember back in 60s, early 70s, where we all worked so hard to get military off college campuses, to disband what used to be called ROTC in the high
people's
schools?
history.
And
You know,
junior ROTC.
And all of that is now back, and
Totally
it's
full-fledged
praised, and people love it. It's just like, oh my gosh, the cycle so repeats itself because we don't have a collective memory.
Yeah.
We
do.
don't have that consciousness.
Your coach for the sports team is, in uniform half the time,
The warmongers work very hard.
Well, that's the thing.
Very
Much
profitable.
better organized than the left. you know, or
Very much
progressives or
profitable.
liberals or whatever. They are so institutionalized that that's the way the system works. They love it when the left or non-institutional supporters, whatever stripe, are squabbling or trying to figure out what to do, because they just get stronger and stronger and stronger. So you started to talk about the things that Coffee Strong, and I think does it have a new name now?
No, it's still Coffee
Still
Strong.
Coffee Strong. That Coffee Strong does support veterans and people in the military now. I'd like to know a little bit more about that, and I'd also like to know, what does Coffee Strong do, if anything, to counsel people who are struggling with whether to go in the military or not, and how to help people get out of the military? Is there that component that's happening within Coffee Strong as well, to try to dismantle the desire to go into the military?
They've just started on the counter recruitment of late. They're probably more focused on working with active duty. They've done a number of conscientious objection cases where someone has gotten out with
While they're in the service.
while they're in the service. And then also working with veterans who may have been dismissed because they were conscientious objection. So it's basically a resource center for both veterans and GIs. They do discharge upgrades, they do counseling. There's a link to the GI Rights Hotline. They have legal services available.
Legal services for civil law, basically, volunteer type
And then
things.
Dennis and I do the veterans claims, which is a different set. But
See, in the state of Washington, currently there's only about, 7 of us that are, maybe a little more, but are truly accredited independent VA claims agents, because most of them will go to a service organization to get their help. But we are also accredited by the VA to represent them, and 2 of us, Mark and myself, are the ones that are working with Coffee Strong on Fridays, principally Fridays, to help people come in and file for their benefits. And there are people all the way from Vietnam, World War II, I've
I've
worked
got a
with
Korean
one.
vet, my oldest vet.
And so all the way up through present, and at the beginning, it used to be only enlisted people, and basically those in lower rank, like E4 specialists. Coming up for April 24th and 25th in Olympia, where they have this wonderful arts walk thing, we have a veteran that takes uniforms, shreds them, and turns them into paper. So he's offering paper making workshops with donated military uniforms in front of the Rachel Corrie Foundation mural in downtown Olympia. But that is basically the focus of Coffee Strong, which is also called GI Voice. And it is a totally nonprofit, and it's totally volunteer. There are no paid positions there. Everyone volunteers.
So the total cost of war in Afghanistan and Iraq is 4 to 6 trillion.
We can't even wrap our head around that figure.
Every hour, taxpayers in the United
Remember, it was
States.
only going to cost $60 billion when
Yeah.
they started.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you know about the website called Costs of War?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a fabulous resource.
I'm pretty
It's
sure-
from, I think it's from Brown University, it's back east, but they go through, health costs, environmental costs, economic costs, the lack of resources to do other things. It's a phenomenal.
And in fact, there's a flyer over there that shows where your money goes. You got a big chunk of the pie going to current wars, and another big chunk of the pie going to past wars, which is taking care of the vets. An example, the highest year of compensation of healthcare costs for World War II vets was 1995. So that's 40 years after, 50 years,
Yeah.
after the war ended. And same thing for Vietnam vets.
And these days we
We're
see
now getting into
Agent
high
Orange
health-
people dying and getting complications.
And Mark and I have lost several vets just recently due to complications from Agent Orange. Yeah, that were part of our media team for Veterans for
That
Peace.
no one wanted to say we used for
Yeah.
decades.
No.
Yes.
Well, and there are just it took our government how long to recognize Agent Orange was the leading thing? 10,
about 20 years.
10, 20 years.
It took them that long to
And,
recognize
and now
PTSD.
Mark and I are seeing people that are having liver transplants due to hepatitis. Where did they get hepatitis in the service? Well, the common thing when Mark and Zahid and I went through was the cattle call inoculations. They put us
Yep.
up to the air nozzles, you know, blood splatter next, you know, or multi-vial injection needles. They don't do that anymore. Why? Because it led to hepatitis, which they then called non-A, non-B. Now they don't call it that. It's hepatitis C. But we've lost veterans because of that.
So for, we in our name, the United States taxpayers are paying $58 million for every hour. So by the time we've been here, we have already paid hundreds of millions of dollars, and by the time, we leave today, so it'll be hundreds of
No,
millions of
but
dollars.
the real problem are the welfare mothers. That's
What?
where all the tax dollars are going.
All the
So,
welfare
no,
checks
it's
buying-
distraction.
It's all their fault.
Distraction.
buying filet mignon with their
Mhm.
food stamp cards.
Yeah, well, all the people using, resources that they don't pay for, all the people
Yeah.
that run to the ERs because they don't have, it's all those other people that are messing it up.
And actually, there's also even a movement that say the veterans are robbing the system. There's a group now called Concerned Veterans of America, which is essentially a Republican AstroTurf group that are saying we can do it more efficiently with the private sector.
Yeah.
And they're saying you can cut the cost of these
Cut
wars
the
by doing
benefits.
these.
Give it
Cut
to
the
defense
services.
contractors, Lockheed Martin. They can manage it. Don't give it to VA.
Well, look at all the privatizing we've done in the military. I mean,
It's been a
but we don't even
disaster.
count that as
Yes.
military.
Exactly.
No wonder our military's so small, because we've got a huge army of private.
Yeah, I mean,
out there.
from
We
fixed
become
mostly third world
mercenaries. We
mechanics.
have mercenaries in our
Yeah.
name now.
Yeah.
And that's really,
Well, and those contracts don't get monitored, the spending is.
no bid. They are national security contracts, so nobody can look into them.
Yeah, and we
Oh,
don't
you know
even,
that?
we don't even see the source of income behind it or how much they're asking for.
Yeah. No bid, national security contracts.
And-
Nobody knows.
And when you think about the structural oppression, I mean, the structure that keeps us going, all of this is part of just the norm anymore. I mean, that's what I grew up with. You had an army, it goes all these places. How many Americans question the fact we have, 1,000 military bases or 800? I mean,
It's
a
a
huge
thousand,
number.
thousand. Outside of United States.
So-
Not inside, outside
And
of United
we all
States.
accept that as, that's just the norm.
And
And-
no foreign country has a military base in the United States. Isn't that strange?
And every single military base, if you understand, is a total humongous city with unlimited funding onto itself. Its own, whole thing is its own. From power generation to everything, it's a whole city with all the municipal services and then some.
And imposing our culture on the
Yeah,
local
right.
culture.
So,
so maybe we don't even want to go over and give our money to help rebuild countries. Maybe we just need to get out of their backyard.
you know,
for a
Good idea.
while
There
and
is a
take
book
care of
called-
our own backyard. a
Sometimes
little
they
bit.
elect the wrong people, so we need to go and make.
And there is a book we all should read called Tyranny of the Experts. Tyranny of the Experts is one that I'm reading, which says basically it's an economics type of a book, but it says, we know what's best for you. We don't need to ask you, what you're capable of coming up with solutions to solve your problems. Here's our solution for you. And here's our World Bank giving you the funds, which now we can control
Ties.
you,
with ties.
type of thing.
There's
Here's our form of democracy that we
Yeah,
really want
so
you to
Tyranny
have.
of the Experts is
How-
an interesting book.
How many people have watched the movie? It was mentioned last night also. How many people have watched the movie Life and Debt?
Life and Debt.
Life and Debt. It is, 20, 30-year-old movie when the Prime Minister of Jamaica talks about World Bank and the restrictions, and if they took the loans, they had to do what they say, and all the fresh milk they had, fresh milk in their own country, abundance of it, they had to open the tap and flow it in the streets. And they must, by law, after taking the loan, by law, they have to import toxic powdered milk from Texas. Toxic, which could not be, it wasn't good for human consumption, and they have to import it by the tons, and have to buy it and pay for it over interest. So we need to understand what are we doing. But my question to you is, how many people know about Arlington Northwest? Arlington Northwest.
Well, at one time they were setting up crosses around.
The grave markers.
Yeah.
Grave markers in our parks.
Yeah.
Grave markers. So some years ago, In one afternoon, evening, there's this soldier walking with his wife and 3 daughters or something. And he came and there were people in Olympia, by the Capitol Lake, putting those Arlington Northwest, putting, at that time 4,000 soldiers were killed, United States Army. So they were putting some of them and some of the other people, putting those markers. And the markers were 11-year-old, 13-year-old Afghanis.
Actually, we also put down, there was also markers for Iraqi dead, Iraqi civilians.
Yeah, so Iraqis, Afghanis, and you're reading it has a name and age. This is the person we killed, 11-year-old, 13, or this is our own soldier or sailor or marine or airman who died. So, and my wife remembers vividly, and this soldier says, yeah, but we are going there to save the women and children. We are going there to save their women and their children because they do not know how to save and care for their women and children. And here we had several names in Afghanistan of 11 and 13-year-old, which we killed from bombing, not drone bombing.
When Mark and I served in Vietnam era days, we said we destroyed the village to save it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you know what? I had just had a deja vu. In South America, when conquistadors came, Pizarro, the big minister, zealous, and he came in, he said, kill the natives and kill the natives' children, save their souls, and take their gold. We should remember that. Kill the children and save their souls.
And speaking of children, I'm a retired educator, and I was appalled at the amount of militarism that's affecting our children today. Several years back, Mark and I produced a video show on militarism in children, and we started taking a look at how much time our children are exposed to militarism, not only in the textbooks that they tell of the wars and everything to orient them that way, but what toys do they play with. And so I went to the stores and took pictures of the toys, and we had Easter egg baskets with grenades in them, for sale at Christmas. We had riding tanks that shot plastic weapons type of thing. And then we looked at the video games, type of thing. And then you sign up for these really incredible video war games. Where does that information go if you were a pretty good shot? It goes right back to the military, who then recruits you through the school. Unless you opt out of recruiting, your information is there. And then testing, you want to take this military
aptitude test?
Aptitude test, it's free. Oh yeah, well, where does all this information go? And so you're constantly recruited by that. And one of the things that we know too is that those that have been sexually molested, one of the highest rates is from the recruiters that make appointments with the young students, to try to recruit them.
Every day, somewhere in Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Pakistan, Libya, Iraq, children perish in airstrikes by your tax dollars.
Yeah.
In,
Well-
in the wars that aren't the wars.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one reason why they always say, well, we blame the soldiers in Vietnam. Well, actually, not everybody blamed the soldiers. But the idea that they're over there doing that, that's just part of the norm. That's what we do, and that's okay. And no, it's not.
But we glamorize it too. I mean, every summer Seattle shuts down because the Blue Angels are gonna fly over.
Yep.
Yeah.
When we have the
They
FOR,
call 'em the Blue
when we
Devils.
have the FOR over at Seabeck during the summer, I was there, and
Some veterans
They
go
had-
into shock.
and I started treating veterans because they had a tremendous fireworks down at the waterfront, and then what happened to all of us who were vets? Oh my God, I'm right back in the jungles being shot at, and I came back and you were there when I was there. I landed up, let's see if I can reduce the stress, and what were we celebrating? Independence. That's not what our veterans who went to the FOR event, thought they were in for, so now we're gonna have to warn and bring earplugs and see me afterwards.
Bring earplugs this
Yeah, bring earplugs this year. See me afterwards. I'll help you tap down some of the trauma you're going through as our country celebrates. The three of us are part of Veterans for Peace 109 Media because we produce monthly television programs, and then I take that and put that out on the internet and also put it on a website, so it starts to spread it, and we're part of Thurston Community Television, which is public access, and we pay a minimum of, what, $125 a year maybe?
Yeah.
In order to produce a monthly program which is shown 3 times a week, all month long, and then we're given the rights, and it's a high definition studio, and we're given the rights to do that. So we interview people. We've had one on military sexual trauma recently, an author, and you know that receives a lot of information, but part of it is trying to be an alternative source, and so we're constantly looking for stories, and we have veteran stories. So we say, you know, how did you happen to join the service? And often it lands up poverty draft, which we are aware of. And then we ask the question, what forever changed you? We want to set it up so it's real easy for to say, well, this happened, like Mark's experience of, you know, coming to knowledge of, you know, what's going on really while he was in the jungles of Vietnam. And what are you doing now as a result of that which changed you? You know, and so we tell those stories, and many times what we find out is the veteran doesn't get to tell their story. And so we're trying to provide that source that people watch this and say, I had no idea, you know, or that was my husband, he's never shared this. Well, of course not. He protects himself, you know, emotionally from what he has experienced as we started our session together, you know, that which has really structurally oppressed him, so he keeps that quiet. But we let them tell their story, and for the first time, they're telling their story to us, but then we're taping that and then getting that out to people. But I want to thank each of you for participating in the workshop and raising the awareness of the structural oppression, particularly for veterans, but all civilians, if you will, that are structurally oppressed because of our military and how it affects us. So I want to thank each of you participating in the spring WWFOR session here in West Seattle.
Soldiers, speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars. Soldiers, speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their future.